King of Podcasts here, and I'm looking for your help. If you will, I would love for all of you to go ahead and do your Amazon shopping, because I know some of you already go out there and you go ahead and shop for Amazon. Please go through my special link, kingofamazon.com. Again, kingofamazon.com. That's the best way to go and help me out so that I can make the most out of the shopping that's going there, because I get a little commission based on it. Not that much, because Amazon cut the commissions these days, but it really helps out a lot. Or feel free to go ahead and send me a PayPal donation through my link at King of Podcasts, paypal.me/King of Podcasts, or Cash App is at King of All Podcasts. I hope you'll consider. And now here comes the show.
King of Podcasts proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Here we are, episode 120 of the Broadcasters Podcast. Thanks for being here. Let's get right into it. The big story right now is where things are going to be happening after the pandemic when it comes to the movie theaters. The biggest outcry right now is Universal Studios and their decision to release Trolls World Tour earlier this month. And Universal Studios really just got called out by the cinemas, and we're going to talk about that coming up on the show tonight. A lot of other things going to talk about as well. Local media outlets to the DC lawmakers are asking for help during the crisis. They need a lifeline. We talk about how the pandemic is taking its toll on the media industry, the fast-growing music that is Latin music. So probably talk about reggaeton and Regal Mexican and things like that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. How music streaming and TikTok are feeling the rise of the track one hit. Pop radio being in decline. Well, that's nothing new. Streaming on the rise, and how the coronavirus is changing what we listen to. And an unwarranted swipe at radio and a Hollywood goodbye that goes along with that. Plus, part 2 of my interview with Radio Hall of Famer and founder of Star Worldwide Networks, The Morning Mayor, Dave Pratt. I'm going to have part 2 of my interview with him, of a 3-part interview that's coming up a little bit later on tonight. So here we go. Let's get into it. Universal Studios. Now, into the story that we know about. We go to Variety.com for the latest on this. AMC Theaters announced it would no longer play any of the studio's films because NBC Universal CEO Jeff Shell has made a promise to open titles on premium and in theaters at the same time. Now, there's one thing to be said about having the movie come out and then, having a short shelf life in theaters before it goes to video on demand. But here's what happened. This is what brought up everything. Of course, where the money comes from. So, on April 10th, Universal used the Premium Video On Demand format, PVOD, to release Trolls World Tour, which would have definitely made hundreds of millions of dollars in the theaters. But without the needing of going to different theaters to get put up on screens and the kind of promotional effort needed to be done, they decided to go and put it through digital. The studio revealed this past week that Trolls World Tour took in $100 million in premium video on demand rentals in its first 3 weeks of play in North America. So that's going to make the film make a profit. The results have exceeded expectations and demonstrated the viability of PVOD. As soon as theaters reopen, we expect to release movies on both formats. That's what Shell told the Wall Street Journal. Wait a minute. Now, Trolls World Tour, it went on sale at a 48-hour rental for $19.99. Prior to the pandemic, studios typically waited 90 days after a theatrical opening to release films digitally. And the CEO of AMC Theaters, the chairman and CEO, Adam Aron, did not take kindly to it. He attacked the notion of breaking the window in a strongly worded letter to Universal Film Entertainment Group Chairman Donald Langley, saying the change in releasing policy is unacceptable. Now, Aaron said, "It is disappointing to us, but Jeff's comments as to Universal's unilateral actions and intentions have left us with no choice. Therefore, effective immediately, AMC Theaters will no longer play any Universal movies in our theaters in the U.S., Europe, or the Middle East." Boom. Ooh. That is very tragic. That's a heavy statement to make. And now I've heard both sides of the aisle, and I'm going to side with the theater owners. I'm going to side with the cinemas. Sure, you could have certain movies that could go premium on demand, but the thing was, not everybody wants to go and see the theaters like that. I mean, maybe there is, I don't know, but I defend the cinemas and being able to see the movies at the cinemas in that premium. Because the truth is, the price point isn't worth it for me to watch it on my own TV set. The cinemas have it so well done when it comes to, for me, location's good for me. The way my cinema's set up is great. The concessions work for me. The sound, this picture experience, I can't get at home. I have been watching for 6 weeks at home movies here. I watched the Chris Hemsworth movie Extraction on Netflix that came out new, which I already knew. Mostly that comes on Netflix. I'm not going to be overwhelmed by any movies that I watch on Netflix. That's the first thing. And so, of course, you're getting with a subscription. So you don't expect to go and get more than that. But then on top of that, I have taken a couple of movies I've maybe paid $4 or $5 for on rental. But I would never pay $20 for a brand new movie. There's no way. Now, maybe there's certain movies that should be released this way at the same time. Maybe there's children's movies that could do that, or movies that are geared to a younger audience. But you got to ask yourself the question. If you had superhero movies like that, if you put out, say, No Time to Die, or Wonder Woman 1984, or Black Widow, or Top Gun Maverick, do those movies get the same kind of luster by being just straight to video? Because there is such a dynamic where straight to video still means something, right? Direct to cable, direct to video still gives it a bad tear, and Universal Studios is willing to go ahead and take that chance because they don't know. I mean, you're telling me that movie couldn't have done well in the theaters? Sure, it could have. And it probably would have been more money. But for NBC Universal, listen, for them to do this as a one shot, and then considering, okay, maybe there's some movies that do not make it to cinemas that we should consider to put more movies out in DVOD format that'll work. The other question is, how much are people going to be paying for this post-pandemic? Do you think there's going to be a model that will sustain $20 a shot? Because remember, The Hunt, Bloodshot, Invisible Man, they were all put at $19.99, and immediately they dropped the price. Right? Because they were trying to make their money back. And those movies already had theatrical releases beforehand. So there was a reason to go and do that and try to recoup some money. So I can understand that part. But to make that a permanent thing going forward is a big mistake on Universal. A huge mistake. And then Adam Aaron continues in the letter and says, this policy affects any and all Universal movies per se, goes into effect today and as our 30th theaters reopen, and is not some hollow or ill-considered threat. Incidentally, this policy is not aimed solely at Universal out of pique or to be punitive in any way. It also extends to any movie maker who unilaterally abandons current windowing practices absent good faith negotiations between us so that they as distributor and we as exhibitor both benefit and neither are hurt from such changes. That is a strong statement. And my thing is that I think he's absolutely right to say it. I have no concern. I think he's right to say what he's saying. To say what he's saying is absolutely correct. If you want to cut the amount of time the theatrical release moves over, okay, I understand that part, but really, the money you're going to really make is in the cinema. It's a big ticket item. It's an event. So the event that you would create, okay, the same dynamic would go for concerts. So if you have a concert that's in Miami and you want to go see that person in concert, you want to be up front and close, an event where people are gathering together, like-minded, that want to watch the movie together or watch the concert together. And then you're just cutting them out and just saying, no, you can just watch it from home. I mean, you're taking away what could really be done. I mean, honestly, there is something to be said about going to a Marvel movie or a DC movie and seeing the fans come along and get together. Fast Five, the Fast and Furious movies, seeing the audience that comes there for those movies, right? There's a lot of different movies we see that really just sit out. There's so much of a reason for it. I think there's a point where Universal could say there are certain movies that do not need to get pushed out. There should be an idea where certain movies could be, the window could be lifted. Possibly. But then if the case is that they decide to go ahead and push a movie out to digital and let it stream at the same time it goes theatrical, then the cinemas need to get a bigger take of what they're putting in as an exhibitor. Exhibition is very important. And this, taking that away, I mean, also, what about the movies that need to be seen by the critics or need to be seen by people out there at film festivals? I mean, you can't just put all movies like that out there. And I think that's another thing that needs to be considered. I mean, that's going to hurt you. Like, I understand there's some people that right now, Oscars don't even give a shit. They are like, okay, we're going to consider movies that are Netflix studio movies or Amazon studio movies, and they're going to be getting the same criteria to be considered for awards. And they do, and they win. So that's been taken away, and that's part of the Academy. The Motion Picture Academy, they screwed that up. But again, I mean, they could have just made it a separate category. But they didn't. And now we're faced with this fact. Digital disruption was going to come into play, but this right here, this move was a move of desperation on Universal's part. They thought they could slide past with doing this, but they're not. That's a major mistake on their part. And I don't like why they did this, but this is what they decided to do. And it's a stupid thing anyway. If AMC sticks to its guns, it will forego a showing of a number of potential Universal hits. Here's the movies that will get lost if AMC stuck to its guns and decide to boycott, if you will, and negate any exhibition of any Universal movies. F9, which is due in April 2021. Minions: The Rise of Gru. Sing 2. Jurassic World Dominion. All those movies will not get shown at an AMC theater, which is the biggest holder of cinemas in the country, more than anybody else, more than anybody in the world. And Regal Cinemas, by the way, has also followed suit. Yeah. So now let me go take from a story from IndieWire. Tom Brueggemann talks about Universal just told the world that theaters are no longer the priority. But here's what they're going to say now. Tom says here, clearly the priority, quote, isn't protecting the feelings or the revenue of the exhibitors. Theaters deeply resented in the studio's initial moves, which came as large circuits were finalizing their decisions to close them. As now, this thunderclap in the paper of Wall Street Record has all the clarity of a baptismal announcement. So Comcast on Universal is going to make whatever moves necessary to move forward as a business. Viruses and theatrical windows be damned. Now here's what we know. In 2016, the original Trolls movie grossed $153 million, $346 million worldwide. 55% split with theaters. It generated $84 million domestic, $173 million worldwide. We don't know what the split is for international theaters, but think about it like that. The video on demand splits are much higher. According to Wall Street Journal, they were around 80% for Trolls World Tour, which would be unusually high for premium VOD. Studios saw $100 million in revenue. The split off of that, $77 million. The domestic rental charge of $19.99. The UK is about the same. The film is now available in Europe and Japan. It would mean 5 million transactions. Now, as an experiment is extraordinarily successful. Now, that is one thing that could be said. If you wanted to see what would happen during this pandemic and try to keep money coming in, this is a nice test. You're absolutely right. Tom is right on this point. We don't know how a premium VOD title performs in comparison to a theatrical release that transitions into a VOD life. The question of the international VOD market, which is still underdeveloped and includes many territories like China. So Wall Street Journal characterized theater owners as accusing Universal of, quote, taking advantage of the pandemic and promised a return to normal business practices with the National Association of Theater Owners. So If VOD will not execute a wholesale takeover of theatrical, true enough. But why would any studio want that? Certainly theaters are the ideal setting for many films, and this is where I'm talking about, particularly prestige and tentpole titles. Now, that's the point. Doesn't mean there's certain movies that do not need to go somewhere that need to find a home. Well, I'm not saying that at all. But again, Tom says it right. There are prestige and tentpole titles. There is an ideal setting for those films. However, this is our prediction for how studios will define normal going forward. No film will give theaters an exclusive 90-day window unless the studio has determined that's the best strategy. As to exactly what that looks like, there are variables in that scenario as there are movies. And that's a major step. There were a couple of comments in this IndieWire story I want to bring up here. One says that, quote, Universal and the other Comcast-owned companies, which is Illumination, DreamWorks, Amblin, and an ongoing deal with Blumhouse, they're better positioned to make this kind of move than most of the other studios because blockbusters for adult audiences are not a big part of their output. In 2019, they had one film in that category, and that was the latest Fast and Furious film. They had 4 films in 2018, Pacific Rim Uprising, the Final 50 Shades film, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, but that was family-friendly with adult appeal, and Mamma Mia, here we go again. Everything else in that period is either smaller films or family-oriented releases, including all the Illumination and DreamWorks animated films. Now, moving to video on demand for tentpole movies has a couple of problems. First, it has not demonstrated the ability to produce the amount of money required to pay for a film with a $250 million production budget. Second, I don't think the $20 price point will play well for films that are usually only watched by 1 or 2 people rather than an entire family. Now, Comcast also is the major studio that has a major VOD distributor. They have Xfinity cable service. They own Fandango. They're buying Vudu. Warner's parent AT&T has some pay VOD presence when it's DirecTV subsidiary. Sony and Lionsgate are not in the business. Disney is especially poorly positioned to enter paid VOD because it would create channel conflict with its partners in movies anywhere. So that's the one thing. That's a well-point said right there. Universal's trying to use their platforms that they have available because they're trying to also keep people to go and stay on the cable or Wi-Fi through Xfinity, through Comcast. Now, one other person gives a different opinion. He says, Universal didn't say that theaters aren't a priority. They really didn't even imply it. They just recognize that certain titles, especially family films, might have a better chance on VOD than in theaters, which is something that has been well known for like a decade. There are a ton of guys who make a great living cranking out crummy family movies just based on the distribution principle that Universal just articulated. Blockbusters, horror films, and a decent number of prestige dramas all make the majority of their money within a business strategy capitulated by a theatrical release. Smaller dramas get shafted, but that's a trend that we've been seeing well before the pandemic. All that information is shared later. So the bottom line is the title might be sensationalist and misleading, but if people care about the theatrical experience, we shouldn't be proclaiming its death. So this could be an isolated incident, according to what we're just reading right there from those comments. They're probably absolutely right. So leveraging in a multi-platform approach, maybe Universal needs to come back to the cable and say, listen, AMC, we can absolutely work with theaters and give the time. But I think where AMC needs to come in is, this is where new movie theaters need to go in, or their cinemas should be open for more indie projects. Remember, there's some other movies that get the space that Universal gives up. But Universal still needs the theaters. They still need exhibition. So for them, it's important to not go ahead and let that strong statement by their CEO just linger. The National Association of Theater Owners, Universal Studios, they need to get in touch with each other. They need to connect and create some kind of a pact. Look, you don't cut out the 90-day window. That's already a short enough window as it is. I think it's a good window as well. When that window changes, you have the Redbox of the world. You have the digital video on demand. All that right there is into play. And then putting it out, I think you got to have that secondary market that will buy at a lower price point. because you're not going to get anybody to go on and really pay for that. Because honestly, I think people that are at home, they were used to having it a year behind or 6 months behind. 90 days is not that far away. And some people will just say, you know what? I'm not going to watch this movie now. I'm going to wait till it comes out on video. They all do that. I don't think you're going to get that much of a difference. Because if you're going to make people wait 90 days, yeah, the price point goes down. The devaluation immediately begins for a movie after that. And the point is said, $19.99 for a movie, you're not going to get that price. You're not. You're better served by taking the deal that you're getting from the theaters and, if that's the case, look, I don't know what you do, but I think what needs to happen is if you're going to do that and you're going to allow video on demand on a sooner range, then you know what? You need to give the cinemas a better cut. They need to get a better cut of what they're getting. So at 55% currently, you dropped it to 50%, or you let the theaters take the majority of the cut. I mean, I don't know what else you do. Or you just make it you make it a straight 50-50 split. You have to give some kind of a compromise here. Or take back what you're saying and just say, listen, there's a different division, a different movie division. We're going to have movies that will be specifically towards video on demand that would not benefit a theatrical release. If you want to, and I'll tell you what, you want to make it where the adult movies become more prominent on screen, I don't mind that so much. Of course, I don't mind because I don't have kids. But for me, if that's what you want to do and you feel like it's just easy to go and do that for those out there, okay, go right ahead. But Universal makes a mistake here. And I see no other studios are thinking the same thing. And I don't think they want to. I think it will be a big mistake. A couple things I want to go and bring up as well. BBC considers quarantining casts and crews together so filming can continue. It's a new story that's being brought up. I just saw this. So the UK is set to reevaluate lockdown measures by May 7th, but the production suspension has the BBC worried about an eventual lack of new programming should production of TV shows continue to be suspended, and will BBC face giant programming gaps that it might not be able to afford. So the thought has been now to get television production up and running by quarantining entire casts and crews together, from a story from The Guardian. And the idea would be crews quarantines would allow actors to interact in the same space without the health risks of members coming and going from set. And that it would except that asking high-profile stars to spend even longer on set would add a substantial amount to the cost by making a program, but suggested it could be one of the only ways to get new shows made if social distancing rules are in place for the rest of the year. Plus, the BBC is also looking at new ways television episodes can be filmed while adhering to social distancing rules. A lot of ways of cheating, actors being close enough to act on a scene. Right now, the Australian TV series, which has been on forever, Neighbours, has been experimenting with different ways of shooting while social distancing is in place. So this is still continuing to go on. Interesting. Charlotte Moore, BBC's director of content, said a shift to programs made on Zoom and video conference calls won't be a solution to the problem, as viewers are, quote, yearning for more substantive and slick programs. We're very keen not everything is made on Zoom. At the moment, people are enjoying it. We're all in it together and seeing everyone inside everyone's houses, but there's also a massive appetite for all the massive, flashy shows. Correct. BBC has already reduced the number of episodes airing weekly for certain programs so they can be saved and spread out over a longer period of time to fill expected programming gaps. Big story there. I'm surprised that no other, networks didn't even think of this, but some shows that just said there's summer programming. This is just where they are with things. So some programs are going along, and we have some specialty programs that are going on, but, I haven't watched it. There's just not much good to go on, watch. But again, BBC is just a different story. Their radio, their television, just the way they do things, they just do a better job of content. That's why it gets so much press over here and so much praise. Okay, move along to media outlets, the news industry, and all that's going on. First, let's take the overall story From the Columbia Journalism Review, coronavirus and its toll on the media industry. So since 2008, nearly half of U.S. newspaper journalism jobs have disappeared, according to the LA Times. Thus leaving fewer than 38,000 reporters, photographers, and editors. Waves of layoffs have become the norm, not just for large chains like Gannett and McClatchy, but for smaller papers like digital giants BuzzFeed and Vox, who were at one time seen as the future of online media. And now with the pandemic and the unprecedented shutdown of entire cities, there goes the advertising business for many of those. For many outlets, a media analyst, Ken Doctor, says this will be an extinction event. So they mentioned right now they're talking about one paper, the Sacramento News and Review, which has sister publications in Chico and Reno, California. Weekly newspaper, 50 years, survived wildfires, recessions, and being sued by a mayor. But now the advertising is all swallowed up. And 4 days after the virus was defined as a pandemic, they had to shut down their presses for the last time, laid off all 40 members of staff, saying this could be the death knell, and not only for us, but the dailies we were competing with. So that is one that might be gone. The Jewish Chronicle, first published in 1841, and the Jewish News in the UK recently shut down and liquidated all of their assets. There are other alternative weeklies across the U.S. and Canada cutting back on printing and laying off staff. A broad range of large and medium-sized publishers and news outlets have implemented cost-saving plans that consist of both paid and unpaid leave for significant others of staff and reduced salaries for others. New York Times estimates roughly 33,000 workers at news companies have been laid off, furloughed, or had their pay reduced in the past month. LA Times right now, salaries for senior management are going to be reduced. 40 staff are going to be put on leave for 16 weeks. That could turn into outright layoffs. The Chicago Tribune, Baltimore Sun, New York Daily News will permanently reduce the salaries of those making more than $67,000 between 2 and 10%. And will offer undisclosed number of buyouts. And executives will also take pay cuts. Condé Nast, which publishes Vogue, Vanity Fair, and New Yorker, they're cutting pay 10 to 20% for those making more than $10,000. Or should be $100,000. God, well, that'd be crazy. For 5 months starting in May. Fortune magazine is laying off 35 people, or 10% of its staff. CEO Alan Murray will take a 50% pay cut, and other executives will reduce by 30%. Gannett, publishing USA Today, Detroit Free Press, and more than 250 newspapers. They've warned a majority of its 24,000 employees to take 5 days off per month without pay in April, May, and June. And there's more on the struggles. Vice Media is halting 401k matches and freezing promotions, in addition to enforcing pay cuts for top employees. And they're owned by Disney, by the way. The CEO is taking a 50% pay cut. The Vox Media Union said it got management to agree on the full cost of health insurance paid for, with co-pays and deductibles reimbursed during furlough, a buyout option that adds 4 weeks of severance to the CBA guaranteed severance, and a guarantee that they will not be replaced by contractors. National newspapers in the UK could close unless the government finds a way to support the industry. Facebook and Google have both announced attempts to help the media industry. We talked about that last week. Facebook announced $25 million in emergency funding. Google announced its own $100 million journalism fund. And that's where we are with all that. So with that said, Corporation for Public Broadcasting. As we know, in the last stimulus bill, they received $75 million in federal emergency relief funds. And they're going to be divvied between public TV and radio stations. So it'll be split evenly into two pools of $37.5 million each. The 158 public TV stations in its community service grant program will receive $200,000 in stimulus funds, according to a memo by the president of CPB, Pat Harrison. A lot of things happening right now. Now, what's happening as well is the media industry is trying to reach out to get help from the lawmakers. So here's what we're getting from that. Deadline.com reports local media outlets to DC lawmakers. Consumers are leaning on us during the coronavirus crisis, but we need a lifeline. Advertising locally, estimates have ranged from 40 to as high as 90% drop. Radio has been hit hard, especially many commercial stations. Right now, these stations argue that at the very moment they are providing valuable, needed information to the public, they're also at risk of shutting down because of plunging local advertising revenues. Well, they're not offering local content. Most of them, they don't have the staff to even go and supply that. Let's be honest here. So now the problem that some newspapers and stations have run into is that they do not qualify for SBA loans, the Paycheck Protection Program. They are larger chains that have more than 500 employees. So during the past few weeks, the Coalition of Media Industry Trade Groups, the NAB, National Association of Broadcasters, the News Media Alliance, have been lobbying Congress to get a provision that would make larger chains eligible for the relief program if they have fewer than 500 employees per physical location of their businesses. So there is some talk, but that's all there is right now is talk about that. News Media Alliance CEO and President David Shivern says that publishers will see 50% declines in the second quarter. He says, even though there has been plenty of attacks on the news media from political figures, this hasn't been a factor so far in the push for local media relief. Quote, we have not really seen this being a really highly partisan issue. Comparing it to the common scenario where voters express their disdain for Congress, yet love their congressman. Now, broadcasters and publishers are pushing for another route of this relief, federal advertising dollars. So there is a group of more than 240 lawmakers that sent a letter to the president urging him to direct federal agencies to spend their ad dollars estimated at $5 to $10 billion on local media. They have not received word, and there is a possibility that such an ad spend will be included in future legislation. One radio group owner thinks in the industry with federally licensed stations needs a more substantial relief from the government. He said the predicament of stations has similarities to the airlines getting injectional loans to keep them going for the next coming months. He says, quote, you are going to have communities all over the country losing stations, which are especially essential in an emergency. This is what we face. So, fine. But it still comes down to the fact that these radio companies, listen, they were never ready for a rainy day. Newspapers were never ready for a rainy day either. And I don't know. Are they really serving the public? Local TV stations aren't asking for the money. They're actually doing okay. I mean, I see a lot of local TV stations right now that are doing just fine with advertising dollars. I see it. So, what's the story here? And of course, they're running news content. That's where people are getting their news from. Or if the newspapers are putting their content online, but that's about it. Or Google or Facebook. They're finding other ways to get their news. And me being a broadcaster, I don't know, man. Listen, those are dying media right there. Both. Newspapers and radio. It's an old guard. You know, we already know that with the Great Recession of 2008, there's always a chance that we could get some companies or some industries are going to be, bombarded or are going to get dropped. And here's the thing. For radio, this is where I feel like if the radio stations get put up for sale, let them get put up for sale for somebody else that can run them right. That's what I have to hope for, because I'm hoping for an implosion. These companies cannot control themselves. They don't get the advertising dollars because they don't have the right model on how to run their companies. They're losing the podcasting. They're losing the digital streaming, all of it. They need to stop with the advertising model they have. They need to change it. They need to change it altogether. And listen, you don't have the talent that's going to keep people around to listen to commercials all the time. Sorry, the one person that used to keep people to listen to commercials was Howard Stern. And right now, Sirius is looking to go ahead and try to extend them out another 5 years, it looks like, or do another contract with them, which I personally have already talked about on Twitter, and I already made the claim when I saw that the CEO of SiriusXM says, oh, Howard can stay on for as long as he wants. But I'd rather have Howard hang up the headphones right now. It's enough. Let him do something on television. But I don't think we need to have him continue doing radio. People still like it. If you're going to still pay for it, that's fine. It's still a premium model. But as a radio guy, he's done what he needed to do. I think it's exhausted. And he's also changed himself so much. It's nothing like he was anymore. So, he's not helping radio much at all. He's supporting and propping up SiriusXM. which is fine. But he's not even getting that much because remember, out of 35 million subscribers, maybe 3 million are subscribing to his channel for his channel just for the purpose of. And that wasn't like that way before, but now it is. It wasn't, he actually had more people that were listening in for him just because of him. But again, SiriusXM got their audience. They're not going to lose much at all if they let Howard go. And again, as of 2015, that show cost $80 million a year to make. And who knows how much it costs now or how much it's going to cost the next contract run around. Plus, they just bought Pandora. They're trying to buy iHeartRadio. So I think SiriusXM has different things they want to do. But yeah, they want to keep Howard on. But I don't know what kind of money he's going to be able to ask for. Or if he asks for less, just to keep it going. But if they go into their 5-year deal, he gets to be 71 years old when he finishes up that contract. That's a long time, man. Just saying. I don't know if he stays consistent or relevant enough to keep things up, but I guess some people think there is. I'm not in that argument. I don't believe in that. We got some music news we're going to talk about coming up, but I want to take one more story on radio. From the Radio and Television Business Report, they put out a story saying a Hollywood goodbye with an unwarranted swipe at radio. Just want to take this one point because I can't read the rest of the story because, of course, paywall. Michael Nathanson, senior analyst at New York investment house MoffettNathanson. He fears that the pandemic has created another period of economic duress, accelerating shifts in consumer and corporate behavior. Despite a lack of clarity on when the current sad state of affairs comes to an end, we have a strong belief that the production and distribution of media content will be permanently changed by this crisis. That's a quote that's important. And the fundamental pillars of media, which are starting to crack heading into 2020, are crumbling. This could be a permanent wound, or is it? You liken it to how radio advertising was mortally wounded in a prior recession. Well, it was, but the truth is, it's all done. I mean, what are you going to do? There's a lot going on right now. And for the fact of the matter is, I don't mind the change. I think people are much more accustomed to podcasting and digital streaming. This is where the digital disruption now comes to a head where which of the major mediums, individual mediums, right? Music, movies, TV, and radio. We're seeing the struggle here. And the pandemic has amplified this to another level on all the ends. The way television is consumed, digital streaming for all the streamers, and the push on that, because we already knew that pressure was going to be brought on, as we talked about on this show prior to, with all the new streamers coming in. Well, this just amplified things because people's viewing habits now have completely changed. The music habits, same thing. The reading habits, the listening habits, all of it's changed. It has all changed. So you got to ask yourself, there's a lot to be said right there. And so radio and newspapers, are they coming to an extinction? Are we going to see a full change up? Because I think radio needs to be becoming something else. I want to be around for what radio becomes next. They need a change. It needs to be in a transition mode. Now in this new decade, this is where radio in 2020 needs to change to something different. They need to build a better mousetrap. They need to change the model they've been using for years. The radio model got amplified with so much advertising, they need to change things up. Yes, you need advertising to sustain, but then what do you do different that makes people want to come in? Because you have to be content heavy. You got to be content heavy and content friendly. And this is where I think something else happens. I mean, these stations can't go alone. Maybe somebody else buys these stations out. They find a way to go and do it. But you have to get rid of the ads. You cannot have set ad breaks anymore. I don't think you could do that anymore. These stations have to be able to go and run commercial free all the time, or as close to ad limited ads as possible. Yes, those are free models, but still people are willing to go and spend the money going somewhere else. For new music stations, you have to be ahead of the music and compete with your digital cohorts. You have to compete. Radio doesn't understand that Spotify, Pandora, Apple, and Amazon Prime, those are all competitors now. It's not the station across the street anymore. Their competition is digital. And they're losing. And they're delusional because they're losing. It's because of the fact they're delusional, they are losing. Let me rephrase it like that. They don't get it. But Michael Nathan says it right. Production and distribution of media will be permanently changed. And it is. And there will be new people that will find that content. Or radio, I don't know what will happen. If the airways, FM or AM get used for something else. But, I mean, people are still listening to it. Obviously, federal government is still propping up the public radio stations. But private radio, private newspapers, I don't know what you do. I don't know. But it's been hurt because of consolidation, the deregulation. It's all hurt it. I mean, the companies, the way media right now is being consolidated, it's more about having digital and terrestrial properties and assets. But what are you going to do when you have all these radio stations and all these companies that are just, they're barely putting any revenue in and they're running on debt? The pandemic now has exposed them. 2 companies coming out of bankruptcy, are they even going to survive? Like, how far to the bone do they have to go in order for them to not be able to survive all this? Because listen, 3 months, 4 months, or 6 months of deterioration of advertising, that's going to take away a lot of different products. And I think there's just going to be other companies going to be out there. They're going to go and swallow these stations up and all these newspapers. I don't think the newspapers survive. I think the newspapers start falling off. They don't get replaced. Digital becomes the place to go. But I feel like newspapers are going to go ahead and fall by the wayside anyway. It is going to happen. The newspapers don't really have much of a chance to survive. Maybe in certain markets. Everybody has a phone they can look at. Like, if you want to have subscriptions through digital, you can do that. Or you just find another way to go and keep the coverage going. But honestly, the TV stations locally, they need to go ahead and make sure their digital products are all in place. And they keep a news division that will continue to report on all the news that goes on. And this is where they have beats that are provided by other people, whatever they got to do. They have a digital news division within the TV stations. They're the ones that handle the news. Let them handle it. Whatever doesn't make it on TV goes on the digital. And more comprehensive on top of that. It's probably what you need to do. So with that said, there's not much you can do right now. There's not much that can be done. And it would be good to see more context from the stories we see on TV on a regular basis. And as for radio, I don't know, man. I think there's a lot of people that will be interested in buying radio stations if they're being sold cheap. A lot of communities can be served in individual factors based on what these radio stations are being sold for. That's one thing I could imagine. If you have certain stations that are propped up by a company, like one of my favorite examples of this is Patrick Pfeffer. Patrick Pfeffer, he, as far as I know, Patrick Pfeffer, along with his brother Thorsten, they own the nightclub Club La Vila. It is the largest nightclub in the USA. That's what it's billed anyway. As most of its fame and infamy during the weeks of spring break when thousands of college students converge on the club. In January 2014, the station was purchased 93.9 FM translator or 1290 AM in Panama City Beach. WPCF was purchased by Patrick Pfeffer and decided to go ahead and change the station's format to dance. And the major advertiser is Club La Vila. So basically, once an hour, you hear an ad for Club La Vila and maybe a couple other smaller advertisers that probably work alongside them. But for the most part, very little commercials. And the music is unique. It's different. That is a format I think that works well, because honestly, I can see that Play FM has survived and has thrived after all this time. Now it's moved over to 93.1, but still, they're doing just fine. So they've been surviving just fine. They have different giveaways, they have different shows, and they broadcast music that doesn't get played much anywhere else 24 hours. And that is an example of a format that still works. I think we need individualized, designed stations. We don't need formats necessarily. There can be stations with certain formats, but I think there are certain stations that are identified by brand more than are identified by anything else. The other idea would be is that stations should be bought and nationalized. Not in terms of like a government type of deal. I'm saying they should take the BBC radio model on how they have their stations, different stations around the country under different frequencies with the same format, and just run it like that. Might as well. But for right now, there's not much else you can do. Radio it's not on its deathbed. Public radio is getting propped up. But again, the way politics goes, there's still a chance that NPR and PBS could get their funding taken away, and then they'll have to be listener supported. I think that day will be coming. I think that day will come someday. They're not going to be able to go and keep $400 million a year coming into their coffers to pay for their programming. I don't think that's going to continue to happen. And I think that NPR and PBS can find ways to keep themselves relevant. There's a purpose for them, absolutely. It's a lot of government money, a lot of taxpayer dollars, and I don't know if everybody wants to be happy to have. So you got to think about that. And of course, with every story that talks about radio is dead, I have to always talk about the stories with digital streaming. There was a story that came out from musically.com that said Spotify's mantra for radio versus on-demand streaming. Quote, everything linear dies, end quote. So Spotify CEO Daniel Ek and CFO Paul Vogel, they were fielding questions from analysts following their first quarter 2020 financial results. So Ek has a desire to up-level the conversation around Spotify and what its competition was the major standout. He says, quote, both short and long term, we are always thinking about Spotify's role within a larger ecosystem. So most focus externally is on competition between streaming services. We continue to be focused on the billions of users who are listening to linear radio. Multiple times, and this is why I really love Spotify. Because I think they really do get the radio audience. And the way their playlists are curated, the way they're set up with their today's top hit list, and the way they really do bridge and let the new music come and flow and how it comes to the top is outstanding. I love the way they set themselves up. Multiple times during the call, he came back to the notion that big audio trend of the next 20 years is a move from linear to on-demand, of which the music world mainly is about radio to streaming. At one point, he said, everything linear dies. It's not a new line for the company. The former CEO, Barry McCarthy, took over. He said back in 2018, he also says the 20-year trend is linear dies, everything on demand wins, end quote. They also said that the trend line of moving from linear to on demand will likely be accelerated by the pandemic. And some other things that were talked about was that the freemium model that Spotify has could be seen as a disadvantage during hard economic times because if people unsubscribe, they can still listen for free, making it one of the easier digital subscriptions to drop. But Ek argued it's an advantage, describing Spotify's free tier as a bridge in difficult financial periods. We've seen an increase in lapsed users coming back to the service. One can speculate and guess that those may have been with competing services, but in light of the economic crisis, are coming back to our freemium offering. And there's no concrete evidence to cite yet, but the majority of our competitors, he says, do not have a free tier, and that makes us more appealing. Now, another thing that's really important here is Spotify's marketing tools may not be restricted to its own platform. We're experimenting, they said, with various tools based on what our customers are telling us, i.e. labels and artist teams. And you may see off-platform tools too. And this is about a question that a lot of artists using services like TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. Spotify might launch some its own off-platform marketing tools. But an on-platform would still be the main focus. Everything has to go back to Spotify. They've also said that when it comes to music and listeners' habits, car usage is down, home usage is up, a growth in instrumental, classical, chill music, and possibly a bit of a skew away from frontline releases and towards catalog. But that might be because of the pulled releases in Q1. We could see a lot more music coming out in quarter 2 and quarter 3. All of that's really interesting. And I think one of the things I'm actually really interested in right now is what TikTok's doing. Because every time I hear about a new song, it's because TikTok has launched it. Old Town Road is the best example possible. It's originally a song that came up from there and really made it up to the top. Savage by Megan Thee Stallion right now is the latest example. The Savage challenge, the dance challenge, the song Savage that came out. And now a remix with Beyonce just came out this week. So it's just further getting the song into the Billboard chart and pushing it up. That's what's happening now. So let's talk about that. Quartz actually brought up the story of how music, streaming, and TikTok are fueling track one hits. So on the week ending April 2nd, 2020, Dua Lipa had 3 songs in the top 40 most streamed on Spotify. 2 tracks, track 2 was Don't Start Now. Number 4 was Physical. Number 9, Break My Heart. And by the way, on the UK official chart, at that same time, those 3 songs made it to the top 10 of their list. And this is from her new album featuring Nostalgia. Track 1 of her album couldn't even crack the top 100, but Dua Lipa is an anomaly. Of course, there's a paywall on this, which is really stupid. 2020, nearly 50% of the top 40 Spotify hits in the U.S. were the first track on release. And those are all songs that were, definitely given advantage of by TikTok. Blueberry Faygo by Lil Mosey, Jack Harlow's What's Poppin', and Arizona Rivers' Roxanne. So, of course, assholes at Quartz want to go ahead and put this aside. They can't let us go and talk about TikTok music. So there we go. I'm just going to go and pass that story then. Bastards. Rolling Stone. They're always allowed to let me go and do things without having a paywall. So TikTok has been responsible for the rise of several chart-topping hits, and artists like Drake are going to the platform to give their singles a very early boost. So Toosie Slide did get the chance to be put up there and did make it the number one song for 1 week. So it did help with that sense. But again, it's just one song that's coming out that's leading up to maybe an eventual album release. More artists are starting to use TikTok, creating demand for singles before they're even out. And some are intentionally snippeting their songs for TikTok before releases. If all goes well, by the time an artist pushes his or her single to all streaming services, there's already a dance associated with it, a build-up, and people are dying for it to come out. So in theory, all that pent-up demand leads to a surge in streaming activity once a track is widely available. So it's no secret that TikTok can prime the pump for hits. We talk about Old Town Road. We're just talking about Roxanne, Doja Cat Say So. Those songs are TikTok promoted and pumped up. Some quarters of the music industry are trying to be more proactive, using the app as a key early testing ground for songs before they get a wide release. It's becoming a sounding board, a focus group. So using TikTok as a sounding board isn't always an intentional process. In some cases, it could be a leak. Blueberry Faygo is a great example. According to the rapper's manager, Lil Mosey, a leaked bit of the song picked up traction on the app earlier this year, weeks before it hit streaming services. The pre-release fervor made the decision to focus resources on Blueberry Faygo to shoot a video for the track and prepare for a radio push, a no-brainer. And then, after the song was officially released, Blueberry Faygo quickly became the biggest track of Lil Mosey's young career. See, Quartz, I could have been talking about your story, but you know what? Fuck off. I'm just saying. There's a lot of other names they put in here that I don't know about, but again, there's a whole lot that's being said on how much they're getting right now to accumulate streams on Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud, things like that. Question now is, does it make a difference if there's demand for a song before it comes out? It's certainly not necessarily for a hit, as TikTok itself has proven time and time again, but it can't hurt. The thought is that if a snippet blows up on TikTok before the song's release, makes the song move a lot harder versus the song if it was already out and then it blew up. It does add hype. Some labels are invested enough in the idea of pre-release demand that they're actually reverse engineering hits from TikTok, creating songs and then testing them on the app to see what connects from a wide and young listenership, finding sounds that are already popular on TikTok and then using those as the building blocks for new songs. So there's a new song that came out for Tyga, a song called Bored in the House, released at the end of March. There's a cappella rap snippet that's being said, I'm bored in the house, and I'm in the house, I'm bored. It was already picking up on TikTok when many kids were quarantined, and Tyga just added a barely there beat and a couple of quick verses. And there you go. That's becoming a thing that's happening too, TikTok. We got to keep an eye on what's going on with that, because obviously there's a lot that's coming up from what that's being said. Some other trends that are coming on with music. Let's talk about that. First of all, pop music is said to be in decline right now. CNBC put a story out about that. Streaming on the rise and what the pandemic is doing to change things up. So here's what's being said. Working from home means more time for entertainment. The last 2 weeks of March, 60% are engaging with more entertainment, according to MRC data and Nielsen Music. According to Alpha data, the week of March 13th, when the national emergency was instituted, pop, rap, R&B, and Latin music saw greater drop-offs than the average trend. And the rise of listening at home was tied to a surge in smart speaker usage, up 34% in April, according to eMarketer. Spotify is seeing a shift away from new pop songs as album releases have slowed. Streams of the top 200 songs in the U.S. fell 28% from mid-March to mid-April. Older songs are on the rise. It's the decline in new releases and a hunger for the comfort of familiar songs. And now Spotify's taking advantage of it. They now have at-home playlists with some old songs that put up there. Radio broadcasters, iHeartMedia and SiriusXM are likely to suffer. You're seeing a drop in advertising dollars like travel struggle. With SiriusXM frequently used in cars, fewer people are driving under lockdowns, of course. And they did launch a free streaming services through websites and apps available through May 15th to get people to listen to it. On the podcast industry, here's an interesting part. They said that the number of podcast listens is down 20% according to VoxNest data. The lack of commutes is part of that. Podcast listens in Europe have increased by 53% because audiences are embracing the format from home. And the podcast industry is said to feel the decline in brand advertising, compromising 40% of podcast ads. But on the flip side, direct response ad market, which is the lion's share of podcast revenue, is expected to remain healthier. So remember, when you hear Mack Weldon or you hear, MailChimp or Roman or something like that, all these different products that are like affiliate marketing programs, that's what they mean by direct response, direct marketing, if you will. The open question is whether these trends reverse once new albums drop and people start coming in again. Now, they did say pop radio was in decline, but Latin music is actually growing faster than the rest of the U.S. market, according to Rolling Stone. My last story before we get to Dave Pratt. The RIAA is seeing a new boom in the genre, and the word is all the trends that are being seen in Latin are ahead of where they are in the market. So the revenue growth has outpaced the overall U.S. market, 13% as a whole last year. Latin music accounted for 5% of the recorded music business last year, up 4.4% the previous year. If you listen to the top 100 songs on Spotify, currently, a good third of them are Latin songs, as a matter of fact. There's an audience that really goes for that. Josh Friedlander, Senior VP of Research and Economics at RIAA, says that putting aside Latin's notably higher ad-supported streaming revenue, it's an outlier to most streaming trends. And because Latin, quote, over-indexes so much on streaming, it's really a leading indicator for the market in terms of where things are going. Latin has been going strong for years. So remember, that music that is reggaeton, that is regional Mexican or banda norteña. There's a certain Mexican sounds of music that are out there. You also have salsa, you have bachata, but for the most part, reggaeton is the major portion. You could say vallenato, you could say other parts, but the Latin-based music is what we're talking about. So there's also a mainstream acceptance we've seen that they've taken off and opened the door to more Latin crossovers. But now, digital downloads and physical sales continue to drop for Latin music, but that's where they're all going to streaming. So they're talking about the releases from Bad Bunny, J Balvin, Luis Fonsi, and Ozuna from 2019. Already helped Latin music to have a notable 2020. Bad Bunny's newest album, YHLQMDLG, debuted at number 2 on the Rolling Stone Top 200 Albums chart and has hovered in the top 10 since. As for Bad Bunny's album on the Billboard 200, it's number 7. Just to keep that point. And also, interesting enough, Fiona Apple coming back out with an album called Fetch the Bolt Cutters. I got to check that out and see what's going on because we haven't seen anything from her in, over a decade, I want to say. Very good to see her coming back. Glad to see her back. And that album just came out this week. So now it's time to go and continue part 2 of my 3-part interview with Radio Hall of Famer and owner of Star Worldwide Networks. We talk more about radio and its transition into the world of podcasting and digital marketing and advertising and basically being a full-edged digital PR agency doing content across the board. We talk about that transition and all of the things he's been doing while he's maintained his hometown of Phoenix, Arizona. We talk about that in part 2 of my interview with Dave Pratt, the morning mayor. It's the people that buck the system. That's why I always liked Howard for the longest time. And I think I don't feel the same way about him now. When he for a little while after he got into Sirius, but then when it's like, okay, the fight's over, no more fights with Tom Chiasano, I'm like, you know what? I wish he would have stayed and kept the fight in corporate radio because that's what really, I think he's one of the things that really brought it all down. Because the problem is there's only so many people of the old guard that are around today that kept fighting to kind of keep bucking the system because corporate radio, when they go ahead and get to succumb their virus, basically to everything else, it just homogenizes everything. So now who's left are people that are just propped up that really don't have any personality or anything else to give with it. And that's what pisses me off. That's what happened. People just said, okay, I'm going to just bail out. I'm just tapping out. It's done. I don't want to fight anymore. And, it's because everybody's gotten a little bit older. They can't just keep going after it and just fighting with it, And sure, I mean, some of these companies will go and command money, but, it's like people are going to the graves with it. It's like there's not much else left. It's like...
in 2008, when CBS... two things happened in 2008, and one is a little bit stealth that people don't realize. Everybody remembers the economy took a hard dive in 2008.
Yep.
And a lot of radio companies use that as an excuse to divest. That's when a lot of radio companies use that as an excuse to get rid of their higher paid employees, to do this, make moves, whatever it is. But what was really happening was that's when radio really started to take a hard dive, big time. Yeah. So those two things created the perfect storm. And CBS had come to me that year and they said, Dave, would you be interested in deferring? And I said, you mean like an athlete defers a salary or something like that? And they said, would you be interested in working with us? And I said, well, why would I? I'm guaranteed long term, So next thing I know, I get my papers from CBS, and this is what sucks about corporate radio. Phoenix wasn't the highest on their radar. Corporate radio concentrates on New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Dallas, San Francisco, on and on and on. And Phoenix is down the charts. Well, here I was in Phoenix doing the same type of salary, and CBS didn't even pay attention. They just did a cut across the board of personalities that were doing 7 digits or whatever. Oh, yeah. And I was on there. So I reminded them, after they gave me my papers, you'll laugh at this. After they gave me my papers, I said, you guys realize the amount of time I have left on my contract, guaranteed appearances, endorsements, you're going to be paying me more off the air than you would be paying me on the air. Jeez. And they said, oh God, oh my God, did we do that? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, they said, so would you reconsider? I said, no.
I'm thinking Tom Likens got that same deal, because remember, they cut him out at KLSX, and he's like, oh, I'll ride my deal. And he prompted to put up his own network. There you go.
Tom's a friend. He's so awesome. He's so funny. But yeah, anyway, that was the deal. And you know what I did is the ultimate revenge is the next 2 years I had fully paid, I used to create what we have now.
That's it.
And the digital broadcast network. That's what I used the money for, and that's what I used the time to do, is to create the next step, being the disruptor that you were talking about.
Exactly.
And I'm proud to do that. I'm having more fun today than ever.
And and this is the thing where it's because of this model that you've created. I'm going to go and delve into that, but I want to go and take a minute to talk about the book again. Behind the Mic, 30 Years in Radio. Again, you have an update to it, create an audiobook version. So I'm going to ask you about this now, the transition, because you were only in your mid-40s by this point. You were far from being done. Proceeds of the book benefited the American Cancer Society, and also make mention you were successfully treated for prostate cancer in 2005. You've done a lot in your career, had been through a lot, and then you decided to get out of the grueling morning schedule. You decided to go ahead and go on with a grueling morning schedule in syndication. Talk to me about that transition there, where it's like, okay, taking that next step, stepping out of the terrestrial spotlight, and then just moving along and going into the satellite and just beaming yourself out, and then going into online.
Yeah, so what surprised a lot of people during that time isn't the fact that I started a digital network. A lot of people were kind of having some fun on the internet. Some were taking it serious, not many. We're talking over a decade ago. Yep. It was kind of the new shiny toy, but few people were really trying to monetize off stuff like podcasts and video casts. And what really surprised people isn't the fact that I did that. It was more of the opportunity cost that I was passing up. So once that 2 years ended with CBS, as you can imagine, just from being around the city a long time, we had a lot of offers to do. When I say we, I mean my team. We had a lot of offers to do everything from talk radio to rock radio to country radio. I mean, the phone was ringing pretty hot. Morning shows, television morning shows, saying, Dave, you got complete freedom. You can come here and do whatever you want. Give this a go. And I turned all of those down in order to start my own thing. And that's what people were amazed about. Not that I started my own thing, but that I turned down the guaranteed money to do it.
Because there were two directions to go. There was two directions to go. The writing on the wall you saw. Either you saw the writing on the wall that says, you know what, get out and do it and become your own business, or fight and claw and scrap away every opportunity you have until it all dries up. I think of Bubba the Love Sponge. He's been hit with lawsuits. He's had a lot of issues that had with his stations, and then just kept going down and down. And just it's been sad to see him go where he is now. He's now on a station. I think it's on an FM translator, but really it's gotten so to the spot. I mean, he still has some of an audience. I think of other people that have had a bit of an audience that they'll go to the point where they'll just go ahead and broker time. I'll get all these different sponsors of the past to keep propping me up, and I'll just make a little bit of scratch, and that's it. But either you do that, or you do take the writing on the wall. You say, you know what? Okay, I'm going to get out of this. I don't need to go ahead and stretch myself farther than I already have. What I did for all this time, I could take myself to a new venture. That's what you did. That's what Tom Likens did. That's what others did. Very few.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I've always been kind of bucking the system my entire career. There have been articles, and they cleverly call them David versus Goliath, right? Because I've always taken on the big guy. When I started at KUPD and I took that little tiny station in a trailer to Rock Station of the Year, that was David versus Goliath. And then later on, when we beat my former station in 3 months, same story. And then when I proved that we could have the same success in country, same story, bucking the system, winning, bucking the system, winning. And then when I started the digital side, that one really threw people for a loop because of the opportunity cost, but also because my peers in radio went, oh, God.
Yep.
Oh, really? If Dave's going to do this, what's going to happen? And it's so many times my peers would call up and they would say, Dave, I need your advice, man. I'm under contract and my contract's coming up. What should I do? Should I re-sign? And I don't know how, but I became this go-to guy for them wanting to know about the next step in their career. The problem is I would be honest with them. I would say, guys, there is another step in your career, but nobody's going to give you a binky with a 2-week paycheck. You got to earn it. You got to earn it. Your show has to be good enough away from the music. You're not just spinning songs and doing weather and time and temperature, whatever.
Yeah.
You have to have something that people are going to buy, and you have to be able to sell it. And that would scare the hell out of them. And they'd be like, oh, you mean I don't get a 2-week paycheck? I'm like, guys, you're going to fly on your own. Yeah. If you really want to be a personality and you're really good away from the music and away from the comfort of that little radio station you're on, this is the time to prove that you got it. And a lot of them just, they didn't want to take that chance. Well, you can imagine the next call I would get from them is, I got fired. Yeah. They aren't going to re-sign me. Or the more common call I would get is, Dave, they told me I would stay, but I have to take a big pay cut. And I'd be like, you control your own destiny. It's whatever you want to do. So not everybody could do it because they didn't have the guts. They didn't have the backbone, and they felt like they couldn't sell. Selling, I know, isn't exciting to people. It's not glorious. It's not sexy. Yeah. You gotta sell. You gotta sell. And that's...
And the thing is, you have to add tools to your tool belt. You have to learn new skills. You cannot just have the skill of the gift of gab anymore. You got to have so much more. You got to have social media savvy. You got to have marketing savvy. You got to have sales savvy, persuasive. I mean, you have to have all that because, I mean, nobody can sell your product like you can.
And that's what happened. And that's how we grew into this full agency. So the podcast side and the network side that you've been so generous to explain, we're proud of that. But the bigger side of our revenue is the full agency side. And the way that happened is exactly what you're talking about. Podcast hosts would come on with us, and they would eventually say, Dave, we love the way you guys are cooking the food. We only wish that you did, and then fill in the blank. Social networks, video, commercials. And I kept referring others to this business. And after a while, I said, screw that. Okay, we'll do that.
Yep.
And today, that's the bigger part of our revenue, to where we do commercial production for Arizona Diamondbacks, Phoenix Suns, other NBA teams, national concerts, national casinos, national amusement parks out of Phoenix.
Yeah.
And we do all those commercials. So even for those still listening to radio, the commercials they're hearing are being produced by a digital network in Phoenix, Arizona.
There you go. Now, go ahead.
It's just pretty funny. And then a lot of the personalities on radio companies and television companies would contact me and they'd say, Dave, do you do personal consultation, to where you would just do a one-on-one with our personalities and talk to them about typical stuff that you know about, crutches in their speech. Are they looking one way more than another on camera? Can they do an interview? Do they know how to do an interview? This type of stuff. And I started doing consultation. Now today our agency does everything from media buying to PR. It's a one-stop shop. So either local companies or national companies can come to us and say, we need this. Okay, we got your flavor of ice cream. We're like Baskin Robbins now.
Now I want to get into the business model. So just to give you my background, just so you know, Well, first of all, let me go and mention Star Worldwide Networks, what it does. It offers hundreds of worldwide radio and TV shows, general advertising, media buying, all digital services, audio and video commercial production, content for social networks, etc. Now, what I do for full time, I run for a company that's a mom and pop. That's two online radio podcast networks. One is webmasterradio.fm. That's been going on since 2004. I joined the company August 1st, 2005. We do podcast production. We originally were streaming radio first. And then the podcasting, the on-demand model really came across because we were doing it before iPods, right? And then 2006, 2007, it became more podcast first, more podcast prominent. And we've really gone into that, and that's our service model there. But the other thing, too, that also changed for us was we would sell advertising. We would do all original programming on our end, also the advertising the same way. But our business model changed. We were trying to offer programming time, but then we said, no, fuck this. We're going to do podcasts. We're going to sell people their own podcasts and not just an infomercial. We're going to make them, we're going to craft them into a custom-made show that works for us, but then also props them up in the best possible way. And that is where we do very well with. That's our model. So the difference is we're doing it for a worldwide audience, but you have been able to hyper-target Phoenix, Arizona. That's your bread and butter. The programming really, I've seen it also has more of a live radio model, less than that of a podcast from what I've seen. There's projects I've seen where people have taken the money that they've gotten for terrestrial and moved into other projects. So there's LA Talk Live, I've seen has a model like that's very hyper-targeted. SoFlo Radio Miami, that was based on the producer from the Rogers Show. He decided to go and prop that up. Tom Michaels' New Normal, also kind of like that idea. There's still, I mean, obviously they know of the audience that's out there, but it's kind of hyper-focused on where you're from. So talk to me about this micro-targeted online radio approach that's been your go-to this whole time.
Yeah. So number one, I love what you're doing, and congratulations.
Thank you.
On our network, like the shows that you see online on our network are only a fraction of the shows that we produce. Because we don't put every show that we produce on our network. The majority of the shows that are on our network are Arizona-based. That's why you're looking at it going, oh, this is Arizona. But the majority of shows that we produce are for different cities. Like people that even have shows on traditional radio that just don't like the way that they cook the food in their local radio kitchen. Yeah. They want us to produce it better, and then they put it on local radio if they still believe in that. Or on other networks, if they like the way that we cook the food better, that we produce their shows, they have us produce the shows, and then they actually put it on like an LA Talk Radio or other networks, which is fine. We don't care.
Right.
Distribution is not where we make our money. Yeah, we have some advertisers on distribution just for some low-hanging fruit, but that's not what we really do. We produce shows, we consult shows, we try to elevate shows to the next level, and we do all the custom imaging for shows so they sound really good so they can go anywhere. So the majority of shows that you're seeing are Arizona shows. That's why it seems Arizona-based, but that's not really our bigger clientele. Probably, I don't know, 90% of our revenue is outside of Arizona with all the commercials we do, all the production we do. You're just seeing like a tiny segment there.
I can only do so much research, Dave. That's my one-man crew.
But I'll tell you, but what you're seeing, and I thank you for that, we're very proud of, because I'm an Arizona guy. Yeah. So I'm really proud to have those shows on. And for those who really know Arizona, when you look at that network, that you were looking at, you're going to see other Hall of Famers, longtime radio and television people, some of the real players in the community that we're very, very proud of. So I love that network, what you're talking about. But yeah, that's not the bigger model. You're kind of seeing the tip of the iceberg there.
Oh, okay. Because I'll tell you, from what I was able to go and look at and see about Star Worldwide, the infrastructure, you got nice studios, you got a good setup. Everything is very well done. It's good, slick production. I like what you put together. I mean, you're a radio guy. And the thing is, it's funny how, and it's a good question for this. I wasn't thinking about this, but when you hear some of the podcasts that are out there, obviously, I mean, that is where the radio audience has gone. But, some of the grassroots radio people that are out there, they need a radio touch. Or there are those that have come in from radio to transition in that kind of just bring in the same format, but there were certain people that didn't figure out how they needed to go ahead and transition for this new audience, because they don't want the same old terrestrial radio sound. They don't want the commercials embedded. They want, it's a very finicky audience. And I just think, what do you think about the fact that, of what you had to change about what your formats? I know you do have commercials that are embedded in some of your programming, so there's that. But it is interesting where, the mindset of the podcast listener now.
Yeah, and what you guys are doing, again, I give you credit for, because that's so needed right now in podcasting more than ever. So there are literally millions of podcasts in the world, but only a fraction of those are pro podcasts. The majority of those podcasts are just junk. They're on almost these platforms that are like leaving a voicemail. It's horrid. But it's free, and people gravitate towards free.
Yeah.
So in the old days when they would go to, whatever it was, Blog Talk, and they go, yeah, I'm getting it for free. Yeah, and it sounds like you're leaving a voicemail for Aunt Edna in Wisconsin, or they do Facebook Live for more than 30 seconds or 60 seconds, which is what it was originally intended for, and they're trying to be the next Jimmy Fallon. They end up looking silly. Or if they just want to go the free route and they try to duct tape and chewing gum something together like MacGyver from their office or their basement like Wayne's World, they end up hurting their brand more than helping their brand. They look bad. But in their mind, hey, it's free. Not everything free is good. So what you and I do is we give them a professional presentation and some consultation that elevates the brand. I don't know about you guys, but the majority of podcasts that come our way, they are not revenue models. Some are, some aren't. Some want to profit off their podcast, which is awesome. Most don't. Most that come our way are branding their primary business. They're branding their sports team. They're branding their musical group. They're branding whatever they do, but it's branding.
No, for us, it's about it's lead generation. They want, and I always say it's a two-pronged approach when I pitch. So it's about getting leads from the listeners that are going to listen to your program, but also we will schedule, book, and prep the guests that will come on your show that you want to pitch afterwards.
Yep. See, that's the way podcasts should be used. It's a niche market, but relationships are king. We have a luxury real estate agent in Arizona. They only sell $1 million houses or more. So their guests are only clients that either want to sell their property or want to have somebody buy their property. Well, after 30 minutes sitting in front of the host now knows everything about them. They know how many bedrooms they want, how many bathrooms they want, how many square feet they want, what area of town they want to be in. And they close business right there on the spot, because that guest is actually their target. Yeah. That's very smart. And then we put that together in the crock pot with these beautiful studios where they can take photos and scream on social networks. And that's the whole advantage of pro podcasting. But again, the free thing, people love free. And if they feel like they can do it from home and get past the cost, they'll do it, although they sound like crap.
No, and there's also those people that now, look, I get a chance to be on radio. Yeah, okay, but then you see the cream rises to the top. And my thing is, there are certain radio people that made their way through. Adam Carolla was a great example. Now, listen, success, good for him. People that decided just like came into it overnight. The thing is, too, is I will say one thing, and I'm surprised there are not more people from podcasting that have made their way over to other mediums. Joe Rogan going from doing Fear Factor and doing stand-up, that show he does, I must admit, is so simple, and there's no script you could tell. That guy's just off the cuff. It's so well done. I'm like, how? What do you think about when you see something like that?
Guys like Adam and Joe, I give them a ton of credit, but a big part of their credit is, quite frankly, just who they know. I mean, Adam was in Los Angeles. He cut his teeth with Jimmy Kimmel and those guys. His lanes to celebrities, to have anybody on his show from the start to where it is now, has always been available. Joe Rogan actually has had a very interesting career to where he's met a ton of people, and Joe Rogan can get guests that very few others can. So, a little bit of magic is in their personality, and I think both of them have good personalities, and they're very good at what they do. But let's be honest, a lot of people listen for the guests that are on those shows, and that comes again from relationships. It's not like Joe and Adam are far and above better personalities than others in the nation. They just work the system well, and they work the relationships well, and you have to give them credit for that.
And they stay in their lane. And Adam Carolla, another guy. I'll tell you, first of all, being one of the scapegoats to Howard leaving, him and David Lee Roth. Look, I figured David Lee Roth was going to crash and burn. I mean, I like him as a musician, but Jesus Christ, that show was a train wreck. And that's the problem. In West Palm, when they had Howard on a market here, they replaced him not with Adam, but with David Lee. I'm like, oh, that was horrible. Yeah. And Adam, to his credit, another guy with contract money after the fact said, okay, I'm going to start my podcast network. And he started to be the first and became the top guy immediately. And oh my God, I got 4 million listeners. And now everybody's like, oh, okay, podcasting means something. I tell this story all the time on this show. I called Don and Mike from Washington, D.C. at the time when they still, right towards the end of their show, right during the day that Anna Nicole Smith died. And I remember calling in and trying to give some kind of constructive criticism. They got pissed. And then he asked me, what do I do for a living? Because they could see they thought I was some radio guy. I was like, yeah, I do podcasting. And then I said, yeah, I do podcasting. I was like, oh, so you're working at McDonald's, right? Basically, they gave me that. And I was like, okay, that's 2007, whatever. I get it, fine. But, and look at where they are now. They're all like, they try to still kind of keep that radio promise, whatever. But again, the same thing. But they struggle as well to try to keep the money that comes on board. But
well, you scared them. You scared them because through you, they saw the future. And the same thing happened with me, although I wasn't as early as you. Yeah. But we scared them because they saw what was on their horizon. Just like if you look at times in history, 1991 scared the hell out of television networks. Why? Because this upstart little company, a cable company called CNN, was bunkered in a hotel room in the Al Rashid Hotel on the 9th floor in Baghdad doing 24-hour coverage of Operation Desert Storm, and they couldn't.
Right.
That scared them because they went, oh my God, this is the future. This is what we're going to compete with. You did the same thing to Don and Mike. And eventually they're all going to go internet because that's just the way we don't choose what people love to use in media. The people choose that. What we do is take our content and we put it where people can get it in the way that they want to receive it. And that's internet today. That's what it is. And what we're going through now with this coronavirus thing, internet's going to be bigger than ever because even when this virus is over, the culture is not going back in terms of media. Now, telemedicine, telehealth, people know all about it now. Yeah. People know about ordering online, groceries online, how easy it is to do takeout. People know about it now. It used to be that people would ask the question, is there a reason that we need to meet online? Is there a reason that we can't meet in person? The next question is going to be, is there a reason that we need to meet in person? We can just do Zoom. Yeah. This is changing the entire culture. And they're saying that in the month of April, it'll be the highest used month in the history of the internet. Why? Because everybody's at home. They're quarantined. They're working from home. Yeah. More people are getting teachers who never really use the internet now have to learn how to teach their students digitally or they don't have a job. This is not going to go back. The internet's going to be bigger than ever.
Next week on the program, I conclude my interview with Dave Pratt, the Morning Mayor, right here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Until then, remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast, presented by BroadcastersPodcast.com and KingofPodcasts.com. The Broadcasters Podcast is brought to you by KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. If Amazon is good enough for the King of Podcasts, it most certainly is good for you. KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program. The Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at KingofPodcasts.com.